have a few things that I like to speak about, and I spoke about them all last time. So, and Ali here has heard everything that I have to say before, now 25 times and maybe more, probably 100 times. He was a student at Cooper Union when we met, and we've remained friends for a long time now, actually. Yeah, so it's a long time ago. So it's always nice to come to a city where you have former students and friends, and it's been great to be welcomed again. And I had a wonderful dinner with Ilmas and Merrill and other strange creatures who were in the room the other day, which of course meant that what I had planned to talk about, I decided that I wouldn't. But I will talk about it a little bit. I'll talk a little bit about what I thought I might mention. In the background, there is a video which I think I may have shown clips from last year, which was of work that I've been doing in East Africa, and I'm now working in West Africa in Ghana. Because one of the things that I do, other than teach architecture and more actually getting back into design, is that I run a non-profit and we build schools, which are high-yield rainwater harvesting schools. And so what I thought I would do this time, because I didn't do that last time, I hope, is actually talk about that project and why I do it and what it means, and also how it happened, because I know that there is at least one person in the room who's interested in how it happened, that one ends up building schools in very poor communities in another continent for very little money, and I'll come to that. But I thought one thing I want to do first of all is to explain why I wanted to talk today and why I was able to trick AURA into inviting me, which is that today, in 1965, Le Corbusier, who had visited Constantinople in 1911, between 1911 and 1912, and had written a manuscript for a book, which was not published. In 1965, on this day, he went to his archive and he took out his notes and to prepare them for publication. And by the end of the summer, he was dead. And I think that there's something rather poignant about today, which was the day that that architect chose to go back and look at his own history and look at the moment when he had graduated from architecture school, worked for Peter Behrens in Berlin, and then after working in the office of one of the most important architects at the time, went on a journey. And I have decided rather later in my life to go on a journey, and so for the last 2.5 years I have been wandering around the world, using every excuse I can to go to different places to write about architecture, which I do every day of my life in a little tiny modest way, but that little way that started 2.5 years ago with a goal, which was a maximum of 200 words per day, and one photograph after 2.5 years is now hundreds of thousands of words, and many, many photographs, and it's almost ready to be published as a book about architecture. Which is my goal was to think about architecture from a very personal, intuitive, and emotional perspective, rather than intellectually, to try to find a way of writing about how I felt about where I was and what it meant to be there and what the architecture meant to me personally. How thoughts evoked by the experience of being somewhere aligned with other thoughts that I'd had at other times in my life. And that's why I was called today Time Slips By. It's actually a quote from Ovid, which is slightly obscure, but it comes from a book that Ovid wrote about the ancient Roman calendar. And he only wrote 6 months' worth of words about the calendar. He didn't finish it. And I'm also interested in things that people do but they don't finish. Because I think one of the things that a lot of us do as designers and architects is that we have many projects that we don't finish. And we have some that we don't start. And we have some that we do finish, but we are ambivalent about, and others that we love. And so it's a complicated thing being a designer. And Ovid had this beautiful expression, which started, time slips by. And it was ostensibly about getting old, but it was actually about something else, time slipping by. And if you remember last time, my talk was called something equally obscure, which was based on a song. Every time we say goodbye. And my version of the song that I loved was by Billie Holiday. And every time we say goodbye was also personal in the sense that it was about what it means to say goodbye to people, places and things, but also what it means to greet them again. And so I thought that today is as much for me about returning to AURA as it is about returning to Istanbul, as it is also about returning, in this case, to designing, which I haven't done for quite a long time, and I'm working on, in the sense of being a designer, rather than in the sense of being some strange kind of peculiar mixture of teacher, writer, person who draws and person who makes things, which I don't really think of as being design. I think of it as being just something that I do in my life. So time slips away, and the photograph that I chose for the poster is an image I took 2 or 3 weeks ago in Virginia in the United States, where I live in the mountains. And this is a scene, a photograph of a place which is 5 minutes away from the house that I live in, which is a place that I retreat to write. And as you can see, it's very beautiful, but it's also rather melancholic. And I'm interested by something that Orhan Pamuk wrote about Istanbul, which is that there is a compulsive melancholia in the bones of the city and in the lives of people in the city. And I'm a romantic, and so I like melancholia as a kind of way of being. And so from this rather melancholic forest, and after all, if I was a Hindu mystic, I would go into the forest in order to find the truth. But I have been living in the forest for quite a while now, and I will return there actually in a few weeks. But in the meantime, I plan to talk to you about something else. I came from Oslo to Istanbul, and I talked about what I'd seen in Norway and what I'd written while I was there. And I ended with this phrase, not really a sentence, not really even a phrase: architecture will be discovered while fishing for iron mountains in the desert, which seemed rather compelling to me. I had no idea what an iron mountain was. I knew why somebody might fish in a desert where there is no water, and I wondered why they might find architecture there. And so I just left this as a kind of thought hanging in the air. And of course, it's still hanging for me, because I'm still trying to work out what the architecture progress meant. And so I start there, but also on this journey I started in London. And just because anybody who doesn't read most of you probably don't read what I write, and you'd be wise, but some of you do. I thought I would just click through 8 images from the last few days and just confess, in a way, my unbelievable affection for this city, but also my realization that as a person from Britain, as an English person visiting I am, of course, embroiled in all sorts of complexity. And the impossibility for me of escaping from the potential trap of the Orientalist eye of the 19th century, which haunts everything that anybody who is not from here says about this place. And the reason I want to preface this talk today, which is about buildings in Africa, in poor communities, with this, is because all of the work that I do is embroiled in appalling complexities. And it is impossible to build in Kenya, for instance, as I will show you, in East Africa as a British person, without being implicated in a post-colonial, neo-colonial discourse, which is hugely complicated. So forgive me if I lapse, but I am cognizant of the issue. It's just that it's always rather difficult to work out what one does with that. So I started in London. This is the Architectural Association School of Architecture in Bedford Square in London WC1. And I used to teach there a long time ago, from 1989 to 1996. And this yard here has the workshop at the bottom, and it's called Ching's Yard. The reason I was interested in it is because of this thing in the background, which is a building by Ron Heron, who was a member of Architecture. And that building was built for a company called Imagination as their headquarters. And Ron actually became a director of Imagination, having built their headquarters. He became a partner. And it's an extraordinary thing that sits above an existing building. But the view is very poignant for me because I saw that building being built, and also I was hired to teach at the AA by Ron. Alvin Boyarski, who had been the chair, had died, and Ron Heron was the interim head of school, and he hired me to run a unit for the first time as a design teacher. And so this view is a view that is very meaningful to me. And what I wrote about it is very obtuse, and one of the people I speak to a lot in America says this was probably the most obtuse thing I've written. As it touched by love's own secret, he asked the contented fools of fact to listen to his song. And that line is a scrambled up line from a poem by E.E. Cummings, American poet, who died in 1962, that was published in 1947. I have an obsession with 1947 at the moment for some reason. It's the end of the Second World War, and it's one of those times when lots of things are happening, and there's a huge amount of austerity in Europe because of the war. Many of the situations that we're grappling with now politically in Europe, particularly in the UK, which is my home, but not really my home at the moment, is the country and Europe in general are dealing with many of the same tensions and complexities and debates that were prevalent at that time. And then, of course, I came back to Istanbul. And what did I do? The first thing I did was to go back to a place that I love a lot, deeply, find hugely curious, problematic, and not least because of when it was built between 1942 and 1944 by Sadat Haki Eldem, and I was taken there for the first time by illness, and have since been back many times. And I arrived in the rain, and I don't know why, but this week has been very rainy. But what I really loved about this was the way that the architecture held the cloud. And so I returned to the rain. In the morning, as the city was waking up, I walked toward Orhan Pamuk's Museum of Innocence, past it, around it, close, but not close enough. I was lost. As I was lost tonight, I nearly didn't get here, because I foolishly thought, I've now been in Istanbul 4 times, and I thought I'm confident enough to find AURA without somebody helping me. and that was a little bit of a mistake. So anyway, I had discovered that in Beyoğlu, where I'm staying, it's easy to get lost, and it's also a place where if you take a turn left, you'll go one way, and if you turn right, you go another way, of course. But if you meant to go right and you actually turned left, not only do you get lost, but you just start going round and round in circles, which is something that you're probably all familiar with, but was rather disturbing to me. So I was lost. And in the evening, though, I followed a more familiar path, which was one that I went on with in October last year, with a specific purpose, across the Galata Bridge, through old Istanbul, through the crowds in the Espace Libre, defined by the bus station and the pier, the mosques, across narrow, crowded passages near the Golden Horn, up steep, empty, almost abandoned streets, to Süleymaniye, through the mosque compound, and around Istanbul University to Beyazıt Square, before returning to Beyoğlu, with Henri Prost's European-side master plan, Old Istanbul master plan, and a lecture in Paris, again from 1947, the same year as I seem to be obsessed by. It keeps on coming up, where he lectured about his work on Istanbul in Paris in 1947. And I wanted to, because the first time I came here, well actually the second time, in October last year, Ali had also introduced me to the free space Espace Libre concept, which was, of course, had become very traumatic and problematic in relatively recent history, as we know from the holiday the other day, that the free space isn't free, and free space is not organised in any sense as Espace Libre, even though it might be open. And I had been very moved by that in October, and I wanted to look again. I returned to a love story. Love stories. Orhan Pamuk's memoir, Le Corbusier's Voyage d'Orient, and Thomas Hope's Anastasius, at 3 in the morning, listening to the gulls. I couldn't sleep because the music on İstiklal doesn't go off at 3 o'clock in the morning. I returned to dream. In the afternoon, I walked across Gezi Park to sit at Hakiolder's Atatürk Library in a contemplative mood, my affection tempered by my immersion in Orhan Pamuk's Museum of Innocence, the book, not the building, my experience of the building somehow inevitably postponed. In the rain on Thursday morning, I lost my way, where an 8-minute walk became an hour. On Friday evening, I found it. Too late in the day to do more than look in, not around, the house where Fusen painted and her mother, Nasibi, sewed. That's, of course, from Pamuk's book, I Returned to Forget. And then the most important thing for me was the other morning after I had dinner with, I'm sorry to make it so personal, but after I had dinner with Mara, you, I returned to forget a broken heart, seagulls kissing, streets that reminded me of her. I wondered if I could leave Istanbul without seeing his extraordinary collection of objects, some found, some made, some innocent, some less so, most of them not innocent at all. The catalogue had been sitting on my desk, open at a different page every day, pages of tempting, seductive words and images, magical provocations that wander into and out of my dreams, forming alliances with my memories, my childhood, my family, my mother, my father, my friends, my loves, my beloved places, my home. I considered the possibility that it might be better for me, for my soul, to stop thinking about it, to put the book, his book, away, to forget, to leave, before. But I could not leave then or now. I took the ferry. This is all slightly out of to Üsküdar with my friend Yılmaz Dega for dinner. In Karakoy, while waiting for the ferry to arrive, I brought a copy of The Naive and The Sentimental Novelist by Auden Hammock, a collection of essays based on his Charles Eliot Norton lectures delivered at Harvard in 2009. This morning, I started reading. So you see, I tell you I'm a romantic, I mean it. But also, there's something important for me about how we intersect with people and places and learn about architecture from those experiences, and how, as I get older and less wise, I feel that it's important to be able to answer the question which I was asked somewhere else: are you doing this as an architect or as a human? And I would say that the answer to that is that the fact that that is an issue still, and that it is something that one could actually think of and say, is deeply disturbing, but also deeply interesting as a problem. You know, what do we do when we practice? How do we think about what we do? Why do we do it? Seems important. And I think when I came last time, I was about to start doing a job where I am working with AURA, a big engineering consulting firm, and I'm looking at that issue. Why do we get up in the morning, and what do we do, and why do we work? What's our motivation? What is it that actually makes it worthwhile being an architect and being a designer? So, so in a sense that I wanted to use that, which is, I hope it makes sense to you. It's rather personal to me, but it's also, it's in order to set a framework around why I might be showing you what I'm about to show you, which is a single project that's been done over a rather long time, and this project is concerned with an issue, and that issue is a simple issue. The issue is access to water, safe water for everybody in the world, and it's clear to me that is not something that can be taken for granted anywhere in the world. That the issue of safe water is one that affects everybody. But actually, the real reason for doing this work is nothing to do with water in particular, except that water is a way into a project which is concerned with many things. Access to water affects many people in many different ways. And so, more than a decade ago, actually, in 1996, when I moved to the United States, I had prior to that been working for James Stirling, Michael Wilford and Associates in London, and Stirling was a great architect, fantastic architect. It was an extraordinary experience. I spent 10 years of my life working in his office, and would frequently talk with him on a Sunday because he was busy. One of the times when it was possible to actually talk about the project and talk about drawings was on a Sunday afternoon. And so he'd make a pot of coffee and sit at the table in his room and take out all the drawings and go through them and work on them. He died in 1992. But there had been something happening to me which is also concerned with travelling and adventuring, which is that in that office I had been responsible as a project architect or as an associate in charge of a project with work in Japan, Singapore and Spain. And this was the time before the widespread use of computers, and a time before the widespread use of email, and before the adoption of the internet as an inevitability in our lives. And so what we did then instead was that we used fax machine. Anybody remember a fax machine? Some people do. Of course. But it was possible, working in Japan, being in London, to work 24 hours a day, because you could fax all of your notes and drawings to Tokyo and have them worked on overnight, and they would send them back in the morning, and you get a set of faxes in the morning which updated the work that was done in London during the day. I learned something about time, and not just slipping away, but changing radically because of technology. And then I travelled to these places, and I saw different ways of conceiving a city, different ways of living. I had those lost in translation moments in Tokyo. If you've seen the movie with Scarlett Johansson and Bill Murray, Lost in Translation, I don't know if it's one that people watch everywhere in the world, but it's a beautiful film, but it is also a very, very accurate description of what it feels like to be somehow at the wrong end of a misunderstanding. And that all of us who are in long-term relationships probably also know that we have those lost in translation moments when we're in another country, in another time zone, when it's the beginning of the day for us and it's the end of the day for somebody else. And there's something really peculiar that happens in the space between the times. But most important, I became frustrated with the impact of globalization and technological transformation on the practice of architecture. I became frustrated with the cost of making buildings. And so there was something strange that was, in a way, structural within the practice of architecture that involved all sorts of radical inequalities in terms of the behavior of employers in relation to the workforce, that appalling disjunctions in terms of information movement between architects and engineers and contractors and back again, and all sorts of discontinuities and disruptions that I wanted to tackle. And wanted to find another way of practicing in order to do that. And so much, much later, it became possible to set up a not-for-profit architectural office which would run in tandem with a for-profit architectural office, but was registered as a tax-exempt organisation, probably rather like this one, and would have certain benefits from in terms of one, the crucial one, which is that the income came in the form of grants rather than fees. And a grant, if you have a grant, comes early, whereas a fee comes later. So if you're a practicing architect and you're running your practice on the basis of working and then invoicing and expecting a fee to arrive, that there's often, particularly for young architects and for small practices, there's a dilemma, which is that there's always a delay and there are always complexities associated with that. So we also thought that it would be worthwhile trying to run two models in tandem, which also aligned with interests in teaching, where it would be possible to do research and practice-driven research, which would be grant-funded. But on the basis that what we would do is address a question. So, the question was, why do 420 million people not have access to clean drinking water? And is it possible that that's an architectural problem? Can architecture do anything to help in that situation? I've also done work on clean air, but I'm passionately interested in water and sanitation. Clean air is a very interesting and challenging, but water and sanitation seems to be so fundamental in the world. I'm passionate about the design of toilets. I'm also completely absorbed in very, very antique ways of doing this, which is loving the rain. Why? Because, and this is the crux of it, women and girls in many parts of the world, not just on the African continent, spend a long time, and it's always girls and women, walking for water. And up for 5, 10, 20 miles a day, which takes up to 8 hours a day walking for water. This is a story that everybody knows. It's very common knowledge, and it's one that's just I hope is this going to work for you, or is it that I do this and tell you about this project? Yes. You sure? Yeah. Okay. Anyway, and it's just that the background is very generic and appalling, and remains appalling actually. And the more work I do on it, the more consistently concerned I am about it. Waiting for water. And then what happens, of course, is that NGOs think that there's an answer, and that the answer in every part of the world is to drill a borehole well and make a pump. But many of those boreholes, which are going into sometimes fossil water that's been underground for millennia, and are draining that water, dry up. The well may not be deep enough. It may also be that the groundwater, underground water, is toxic. And this is something that I found, maybe it's not true here, but in America a lot of people don't understand this, which is that underground water can be contaminated. People think that underground water is clean. Underground water is often contaminated with arsenic, or it's heavily fluoridated, it's got fluoride in it. Now, most of us, my generation and a bit younger, but not so much now, grew up with fluoride toothpaste. And so we would assume, I would guess, that fluoride's probably good for you. In a sense, it might be good for your teeth, but it's not if you have too much of it. And heavily fluoridated water actually destroys your bones from the inside. And so toxicity is a major issue. Equally, because NGOs behave like NGOs would anywhere in the world, go in and drill a borehole well and then leave it, is that within a year, many are broken. In fact, the World Health Organization in 2004 said that 60% of the borehole wells drilled on the African continent the year before were broken within a year. And in Mali it was 90%. So that's very damning about the practice. And then, of course, you are all super conscious of the value of water, and so you conserve water and you do all of those things. This is what a European uses. This is a recycling bin, which is absolutely generic in the United States, but I've also seen them here. Tall bins, that amount of water is one person in Europe. That's an American, one day. And that is a family in the communities that I'm working in, and that is very heavy when it's carried for 10 miles, particularly by a teenage girl who is not in school because she's going to get water. So, some of you will know the story because if you were here last year, I told it last year, but in a slightly different context. The question was rather, how do you build a new form of practice that could address an issue as banal as access to water for the maximum number of people in the world, but also as urgent? And what might you do, and how might you think about it, and what's involved as an architectural problem? What is the architectural problem indeed? And so I'm going to tell you a little story. This is my daughter's hand when she was much younger than she is now. She's now 17, holding a stone, which is a very unique stone, coloured fluorescent yellow by me, I believe. And she's holding that stone over a vessel full of water. And that stone is a particularly magical stone. not just because it's yellow, but because it is a soup stone. And everybody in this room last year in October knew the story of the soup stone. How many people here know the story of the soup stone? He does. He does. People who were here before. Okay, so if you'll forgive me, I'll tell you the story again. Is that okay? And it's a very it's a wonderful story because it's for children, but it's been translated into every language in the world. And there are different versions of it. In Poland, there's another version which is called not the stone soup, but the nail soup. Why? I don't know. In parts of India, there is the same story, but in a different form, which is called the stone curry. But with the same principle, which is, I'll get to actually, because the crux of it is that this thing here is an architectural problem. Or at least it's a proposition about what architecture might be. Now, the story always begins, probably in 1947 actually, after a war. And somewhere very remote, where people who live in a village, it's probably a village, it doesn't have to be, but it is most of the time, have been traumatized by what has happened before, which is probably geopolitical conflict. It could be environmental, but it's normally a conflict of some kind. They don't like strangers. And so a group of strange people are seen coming over a hill and down a path towards the village, the centre of the village, from a distance. And they're exhausted, these people. They're very tired. They've been through the same experience. They don't feel well. And they need to rest. And they arrive in the village, and everybody who lives there, who's still, who survived this trauma, escaped into their house. And they shut the door. They shut the doors, they shut the shutters, they close the windows, they hide. It's as if there's nobody living there at all. You've heard the story before? Yes, you have. It's you're from Jersey. Yeah. Yes, people from New Jersey have heard this story before, even if they're Turkish. I'm sorry to embarrass you, but it's true. In New Jersey, people know the story. They're probably told it in school. Where was I? Oh yes, they've arrived and everybody has vanished. And one of them has got a pot on his back, and he takes the pot off his back, and he puts it on the ground. And his friends go around and they make a fire, and they also fill the pot up with water. I'm not quite sure how, it varies from story to story. And they put the pot with water on the fire. The fire is lit, of course, and they stand around looking at the pot, like this. There's a pot with water in it, and it begins to steam, just a little. And the person who has been designated the cook, the guy with the pot, says to his friends, and this is where I've made a mistake in my storytelling, he says to his friends, I want you to find me a soup stone. And they go off and they look for stones, and they come back with stones. And I was not poorly prepared. Not only did I get lost on the way here, but I did not do what I normally do. Because I got lost, I forgot, is that I didn't pick up any stones on the way that I normally would. Because one part of this is that it's always to do with the place, and you find the stone where you are. And so anyway, you'll have to imagine that I have some stones. Right? It's 1, 2, and put it down, and there's a third probably. And we had to decide which one's the best. And so the cook picks them up, smells the stone. That one doesn't work. It's not so good. Oh, yeah, that's perfect. See this one here? It's perfect. Right? See, it's perfect. Perfectly flameless and beautiful stone. And it's perfect. It's in the pot. I've actually done this with 1,500 Korean school kids, which was fantastically good, with a ladder to be able to see them, and a real pot made of metal, and lots of helpers. and we had a microphone under the pot, so when the stone dropped, it made a very satisfying noise. So you have to imagine that. So the pot has got a stone in it now, and it's boiling away, and the cook looks at it, takes out his spoon, which also I normally bring with me, and stirs the water, and looks around, and the most important part of the story happens now, which is that the youngest person in the village, little girl, little boy, is also the bravest, opens their door just a little bit, and they look out, and they pluck up the courage to go and talk to the cook and ask the cook what they're making. And the cook says, I'm making a stone soup. And the little child, boy, girl, they even, not necessarily one or the other, they ask what they can do to help. And the cook says, you know what would make it a lot better? It's an onion. And the child says, oh, my grandmother's got an onion, and he goes back, runs back to the house, and comes back with an onion. And the cook peels the onion, puts the onion in, stirs it up, it starts to smell beautiful, and then somebody else comes out. And they look and they say, what are you doing? And he says, I'm making a stone soup. And you know what? What would make it really very much better is a potato. And they go back and they get potatoes, and you can see what's going to happen. Ultimately, and I won't go on forever, I can, yes I won't, is that every single person in that village has come out of their house and they've contributed some ingredient to the soup, except one person. Actually two, but one, who's an important person because they're the last person to come out. And they smell, and they look at it and they say, that smells really wonderful. And the cook says, the final ingredient that I need, and this is where it gets really challenging in New Jersey, and even more so in Istanbul, is coriander cilantro. Whatever it is. Coriander. What's it called? Okay. So that coriander cilantro, right? It's green and it makes a lovely, you chop it and you put it in on top and it makes a perfect finish to the soup. And so that person says, I have exactly what you need. They go and get it, they put it into the soup, and there's enough for everybody. And they set up tables, and everybody in the village comes together, and they all get together and they talk for the first time since whatever it is that's happened. And they have all contributed to this extraordinary soup. And because it's a story about economies, there's always a surplus, i.e. there's enough the next day. And the punchline is that the oldest, wisest person, but not the bravest, comes up to the cook at the end of the story and says, what's the recipe? And of course there isn't one. The point is there isn't one. But what the point architecturally is that without this, without the stone, and without this inert, neutral, shapeless, formless object that contributes nothing to the flavour, it is the agent that makes the entire process possible. And so the question that I asked myself was, as an architectural designer, as an architect, how do we design soup stones? Shall I stop there? Okay, so that was the question. And then there was an opportunity to test the theory, which is that my partner and I were invited to Copenhagen to participate in a performance art biennale, which was organised by the Copenhagen International Theatre in 2007, a long time ago now, it seems. But what we've discovered is that while the art biennale was on, something else was happening in Copenhagen which we found much more interesting, which was the Homeless World Cup, which is a street football tournament of formerly homeless people from all over the world who represent their countries in four-a-side, very fast football. And while we were there, we took T-shirts. I was from New York, from T-Shirt Express in New York City, had these made long-sleeve shirts with a shape on them, and the shape was an idea. It was a hunch. It wasn't anything other than a guess that something in that shape might be communicative and might do something that would contribute to the story about the stone soup. That shape started to appear everywhere. We made books, but in the book is a drawing. I did this drawing in 5 minutes, maybe less actually, or maybe more, depending on how often I tell the story. It was made with a felt pen and a biro, and it was an idea. Standing in Copenhagen in 2007, watching street football on a miniature, in a miniature stadium, we did a calculation to see how much rainwater in Copenhagen could be captured in 1 year in the place that we were standing, and it was over 1 million litres of water, just from the playing surface of the court that we were standing watching people play football. And so that became the spark. 1 million litres of water is not trivial. In a country which does not have excessive rainfall, in other parts of the world with more, it would be huge amounts of water. So we thought, what would happen if we split the stadium up and lifted it up 2 metres? That would give us enough space underneath all of the bleachers to have classrooms and workshops and studios and other community building activities. And that there would be a sports surface, a playing surface on top, which if we could make that porous, would allow water to come through into a reservoir. We thought at the time we'd make that reservoir out of shipping containers because we thought somehow, naively, that shipping containers were, there was a surplus in the world. There was at the time, but we didn't know the actual value of shipping containers at that stage. And so, in terms of social value, we thought that they were something that could be recycled. So this became a big holding tank for water. As you can see, there are vehicles coming in, there are people setting up markets, there is surplus water, so there are people growing plants. There was a very quick drawing, but that drawing, then we took the drawing and a video of a friendly match between the African nations to a private foundation in the United States and said, please give us some money to do some research to see if we can make this work. And they said yes. At the end of the research grant period, we built a model. This is the model. It's full size. It's a mock-up. It was made out of scaffolding, and it was made by a crew who were actually on Michael Jackson's stage crew, and they, with the people who were providing temporary venues for the X Games in Los Angeles, used surplus materials to build this in 2 days, to be up for 2 days, to show what a rainwater harvesting street soccer tournament venue might look like. And we did graphics that went around: 1 soccer pitch, this thing, it's very small, equals 1 million litres of water, 1 school, 1 clinic, 1 marketplace, etc., etc. It's a very complicated, intricate, hybrid building, made very simply. And it's blue. Now, it was blue because we were in the port of Los Angeles, and also there wasn't any rain, so we had to bring the rain in, so there's a crane there, pumping rain from the Los Angeles Fire Department in order to simulate the rain. But this photograph was taken by Fox News, which is a television company in the United States, from a helicopter. And on this screen, there was a satellite link to the World Cup, which was in South Africa at that stage, in that year. And here, there's a photographer, this one I think from the LA Times, and he took another photograph. 2 photographs went viral, and as a result of those 2 photographs, we got a telephone call and were able to build one for the first time as a real project. Not this, but something else. But called the project Water Banks because we didn't want to attach it to the sport, but wanted it to be primarily about water. and to use water, just to recap, in a very simple way, a hose to catch the water, a tank to store it, filter on the way in, filter on the way out, drinking water as a result. Very straightforward, something that every child in school would learn in basic physics. And then we made mock-ups of different versions of it, and we looked at capacities, and we had grandiose plans. And then we had the real problem, and the real problem was, could we crack the biggest challenge, which was making sure that water stored in a tank for a year, which could be turbid and horrible and undrinkable, could become drinkable. And what would you have to do? And this is where it got interesting in two ways. There's a whole side of this story which I haven't spoken about yet, but I will, which is about girls' education, which I will come to, because I would normally talk about that at the beginning, but I'm going to say that there were two things that were interesting to me as an architect. One was that the lessons I needed to learn about architecture did not come from contemporary architectural practice. They didn't come from magazines. They didn't come from the internet. They came from Vitruvius. So they are one of the oldest textbooks on architecture ever written, has in it the best way of making a system and the best way of organizing water flow through a system. And Vitruvius is an ancient descriptions of ancient Roman construction practice, of which you had rather a lot of examples in this city from the time of Justinian. His descriptions about how to make a system at whatever size were more profound and better in every way than the best practices as they were set out in the 21st century by engineering handbooks. And so I learned from Vitruvius, but we also learned by trial and error, and we learned what we did not want to do, and we learned what we could do. And what we wanted to do, did not want to do, was to get involved in complicated plastic gadgets which filter water. There's one in particular which where you can suck dirty water out of a puddle and you get clean water. It's very wonderful technology, but the problem with it is that it's expensive, and its distribution is too much like selling cigarettes or something like that, where you get hooked. Because on the thing, rather than on the principle, which is that you can develop a filtration technology of your own. Anybody can do it. And so we adopted an open source technique, and then did quite a lot of work with Princeton University Engineering School and the African University of Science and Technology in Abuja in Nigeria, in West Africa, where I was a visiting professor, to perfect the technique of mixing sawdust with clay. This is a mixture of sawdust and clay, which when it is pressed into a bucket and fired, if the mix is right, produces a beautiful water filter, which is also dipped in colloidal silver, which is a disinfectant. Now the trick with this, and this is where the architecture gets interesting for me, and which at a scale where we don't normally think as architects, is at nanoscale, the pathway through the wall of the bucket. The complexity of the pathway is what matters, the architecture of the path that the water goes on through the wall of the bucket has to be very complicated and very intricate and have lots of complexity. Because every time the water molecules hit up against a bump, they can be disinfected. Whereas if they can just go straight through, they don't have time to be disinfected. And so the wall here matters. And it matters because we're working at this scale. That is bacteria. This is a human hair. And the architecture of the bucket is addressing complexities around the pathway of that bacteria. We work at other scales, from the community, large community object to the domestic object, rainwater harvesting house or something like that, small to an individual point of use water filter. And then underneath all of that, there is an idea which is that every building could be designed as an artificial watershed. This, conceptually, is any building. In practice, it could be any of the objects I've already shown you. It's collecting water from the sky, and also possibly from the ground, and it's filtering the water through point-of-use water filters which were arranged in series, which allows you to then have drinkable water that can be used for cooking and for drinking and bathing. And there's a video on your website, which is of me talking about this diagram, but related to the street soccer venue, or through unfiltered through pot irrigation systems or drip irrigation systems that produce food that goes back into the cycle. So that's the principle. Every building should be a watershed, an artificial watershed. And then we make prototypes. Whoops. And so this is our steel worker who's cut his finger. And this is some very intuitive steel work which was designed in such a way where it can be assembled without drawings. Every way it's put together, it still goes together the right way. It doesn't matter which way it goes, but it makes the frame. That frame can be a corner for a system, for a catchment hood that leads to a place where water can be stored. And then we made prototypes out of things that you can buy at Home Depot in New Jersey, because we were in Princeton, New Jersey at the time, and these things were buckets that came from a normal household supplies, but are actually buckets that are available in different forms everywhere in the world, not necessarily in galvanized steel, but in plastics and all sorts of other things, fiberglass and so on. And each of these has a water filter inside, water goes through. What we proved by making this mock-up was that instead of water filtration being suitable for one person or one family, we could make arrays of water filters and we could filter enough water for a school or for a community, and that they would be effective. And we would have a header tank, we'd have a reservoir, we'd have water filtering through, and if the filters were filled in the morning of a school day, for instance, by lunchtime the water would be clean for lunch. And if the water filters were filled again after lunch, there would be water at the end of the day for children to take home. That's a very important thought, because the idea, if not the fact, of this was that in a situation where girls, or teenage girls and young girls and women might be walking for 8 to 10 hours a day to get water and not going to school, that if you make the school the source of the water, you change the logic completely. And so you go to school and get water. Now, that's a wonderful idea. It sort of didn't work in exactly that way, but the idea was sufficiently robust that it was persuasive and it allowed us to move forwards. What we did also is we filed patents internationally and locally in the United States, not for no reason other than it was important for us to know that what we were doing was contributing to the field. And the most extraordinary thing is a patent document. There's the drawing, the diagram that you saw earlier from a computer model that's been turned into a patent. The most important thing about a patent application process, and if any of you are academics and you have ever submitted an essay for peer review, or to a journal, or entered an architectural competition for that matter, you know that the best feedback you get is from your peers, internationally or locally, and you know whether you're on a good track. The great thing about the patent application process is that you get to, not only do you get to have the most ruthless and rigorous peer review process in the world, and to benefit from that, and to refine your thoughts so that they become very lucid, or you get to see absolutely everything else that's ever been produced in the world, anywhere in the world, in the same field, producing the same form of technology. And so it's an extraordinary process, and it takes a long time. And we were very fortunate that a law firm that specialises in intellectual property law gave us advice on this pro bono for nothing, because they were interested in the project, and it meant that we could go through this very exhaustive process of refining and refining and refining a set of ideas. And then we got the call. Remember the blue thing that went viral, the images went viral? A person called us from Kenya, from Nairobi. They said, we might have a project for you. We're interested in what you're doing. We don't want to do that stupid sports stadium thing, because that would be ridiculous. But we want to do something, and we've got 50,000 euros. Actually, sorry, 50,000 US dollars, 38,000 euros. 38,000 euros, and we would like you to build a school. Do you think you could do it? Well, who would say no? Probably most wise people would say no, because that is to build a substantial school. You're building for very small amounts of money per square metre. But we said yes. I went to Kenya, I went to the site, I met the teachers, I met the community. The video you saw at the beginning came from the school which this was built for, and we had an idea about how you might build and what you might build. In order to get the metrics to work, so there was enough water in the tank through 2 rainy seasons, and to span the dry patches of the year, a potential drought, have enough water, needed 600 square meters of roof. And I subsequently was told that I was being silly about this, but I had seen, when I was there, the evidence of elephants coming through a school overnight to get water from a surface-mounted water tank, knocking it over, drinking the water, and actually knocking down a school building to get to it. And so I was very acutely conscious at the beginning of the process that we might need to do something which was also protecting the school against predators of one form or another. And so, and it actually helped with the money as well, because we had, in this case, $8 to $10 a square foot, which is 80 US dollars a square meter, which is, I don't know, not very much. Let's say 450. Yeah, I don't think you could make this chair in terms of equivalent area. You probably certainly couldn't make this table. So, so we had this small amount of money. We knew we couldn't afford windows. At the time, we thought we couldn't afford windows. And so what we did is we put a frame, 600 square meters frame in the middle of a compound with a tank in the middle. And what I'll do is peel away the layers. So it starts at the top. The principle is it catches the water underneath the roof. 4 classrooms, 4 offices for teachers, a courtyard, and underneath the courtyard, 150,000 litres of water, a community space, and in the space between the frame and the perimeter wall, we took all the material that would normally go into cladding the building and peeled it away to make a circle which you cut off so you could get in with a square inside it. With the classrooms in the courtyard. And peeling away further, back to the print frame is really just a central frame and a perimeter. And then the middle, a tank in 4 quadrants. Now you'll probably ask me, first of all, it's very simple geometry. Secondly, why 4 segments in the tank and all sorts of other things like that. The 4 segments are there so that if part of it breaks, water can be moved from one segment to another and one part can be maintained, without destroying the functionality of the system. Trick learned from the ancient Romans. It's an impluvium plan, like a Roman courtyard house, which is, for centuries, even millennia, has been common all over the world. But somehow people forgot that there was a reason why those courtyards collected water and brought it into the centre. And in the places that I work, every single school group building a school will build a school with a roof like this. And they'll build 4 classrooms, costing the same as this. 8 meters by 8 meters each classroom, 4 of them in a row, 4 8s 32, 32 by 8, with a roof on it like this, designed to shed the water, probably into gutters, but gutters that break, that leads to a tank that gets knocked over by elephants. It's not a good result. And so all we did was say, what happens if you take the 4 classrooms, pull them apart, tip the roof inwards, and to catch the water and try to take it into the middle and put a tank in the middle in the ground. It's a very simple proposition, but when you tie that to an idea, which is that you go to school to get water, you go to school, you go to school, you go to school. The most important thing is you go to school. And also that everybody in the school is involved in building it. So this is a very special couple of days, which is a community building operation. There's the tank in the centre, under construction, and everybody from the surrounding area who had any interest in the school at all, from I think I'll say 7 different tribes, certainly 4 different tribes, who had vested interests in the community and would often have conflicts between each other, precisely over water issues actually, collaborated to dig the footings, to dig the foundations. Now, I'll just digress for a little bit, if I haven't digressed enough already, and that is that my friend Ali here and I were both at the Cooper Union in New York City. And the Cooper Union was a school that was free for 150 years. Extraordinary place. And it was designed in such a way where at the bottom of the building, the foundation building of the Cooper Union has in it a hall in the basement, which is called the Great Hall, which is where Abraham Lincoln made his anti-slavery speech. It's where every democratic president of America since then has spoken to people. It's where the NAACP was founded, or the initial, many of the early meetings were held. It's where the fire regulations of New York City were debated. It's where women's rights were debated, electoral principles, suffrage, all those things in that basement. That basement is in the foundations of the foundation building, and it is the place on which the school is built. And I had that in mind when thinking about this activity, that what the meaning of having an entire community build the foundations for a school is a very profoundly important moment when that happens, because everybody is invested physically digging into the ground to make the foundations from which a new school for their children will be built. And it was built. And in the process of being built, we did all sorts of things. And here is the most beautiful picture from my point of view. Here is that small child from the Stone Soup story. This small boy was brave enough to taste the water from the water filters, from a very dirty source. And he knew where it had come from, because we had buckets of dirty water, and we had buckets of filtered water. And he, the youngest, bravest, smartest child in the school community, who was also, coincidentally, one of the best football players, was the one who stepped forward and said, "I will taste the water." And it was a very important moment, because he then pronounced the water sweet. And unless that water had been sweet, the project would not have happened at all, let alone in the way that it did. And what you see here are little fragments of student interns from Princeton, New Jersey, working with the community, doing water filtration projects, the head teacher, my partner, talking about rainwater harvesting. There's Patrick Nwara, who's the head teacher. We have parachutes, which were Vietnam War era parachutes, which we repurpose as rainwater harvesting teaching tools. upside down, they represent what it is to do something which is profoundly non-aggressive, which is to catch the water by opening up a surface to the sky rather than drilling into the ground. And the video with the very noisy drills is on your website, so if you want to go there, you can hear the short video that we made in order to make the point, which is that drilling borehole wells is noisy and aggressive, and they don't work all the time, whereas catching the water in this way can do. And what is advantageous, this is very simple building made in a very crude way, but here's every single child in the school, in the courtyard, on top of the water tank, as a prize giving, where the best students are being given a prize for good work. The most extraordinary thing that could happen is that as a result of changing access to water issues in relation to education and sanitation, as a girl goes to college from this community. If that happens, that's a major, major breakthrough for the community. Here, there's a classroom, and these are the gardens. Between the circular wall and the edge, every classroom has a garden. And in those gardens, you can see there are vegetables being planted. And it's a sawn-off face, there's timber louvers at high level, and behind the white wall, the water filtration system. And on the basis of that building, which was then named the greenest school on earth by the World Green Building Council and the US Green Building Council, we were asked to do another one. And this is the beginning of that process. And this was a secondary school that included many more. And finally, got the chance to build the sports stadium. This is digging the footings for the sports stadium, which was also a school building with 8 classrooms. And this is just to show you how crude the construction is, using techniques that have been in use for building buildings for centuries, with every part of the process organized with material that can be found nearby, with people who have varying levels of skill. And that's me with a hat and a jacket on, which was very funny actually, because nobody at all in the process ever wore hard hats and high visibility jackets, except when the local politicians came to visit. But it was an important moment, because I'm showing or talking to he's the mayor, like your mayor, and he's interested in changing society. He was very, very interested in what was happening with water. And so I was interested in what was happening in the sky, which is what produces the water. And so we were talking about the clouds, because my countrymen, the British, deforested many parts of the world, and so part of the effort here with our local partners was to reforest parts of the landscape. But the topography of the land is very flat. There are mountains, but the landscape is very flat, and you can see the rain coming from far away. It's actually rather like being high up. If you're high up, as I am, where I'm staying, I can see across the Golden Horn and across the Bosphorus, and I saw the weather coming in 2 days ago. You see the rain coming through, and you can watch the rain. The geometry of these things, as you can see, is very simple. They're little circles, squares, rectangles. There are 2 reasons for that. One of which is that they're easy to build. We have to build for very little money. The other thing is that they can be built without drawings. Clearly, this can't be built without drawings because it's going to have lots of people standing on it. But many of the buildings can be built simply but without drawings. And some of the instructions are rather like, has anyone read Samuel Beckett? Samuel Beckett's poetry and plays, maybe one day. He writes in this very, very sparse way, and it's a beautiful book called Malone Dies, in which he describes an old man lying in bed playing with some stones in his pocket, and really precisely what is happening to the stones and where his fingers are. And very simple sentences. And the key to building a building which is very simple and inexpensive is that the instructions can be spoken and not necessarily drawn. That it's possible to say, why would you make a circle like this? Well, you make a circle because the instruction can be, take a stick, push it in the ground, take a piece of string of a certain length, tie it to the stick, walk with the string until it's tight, and put another stick in the ground, and then walk with the tight string 3 paces, put another stick in the ground, 6 paces, put another one in the ground, and you describe a circle. Within that circle, you can describe a square or a triangle, very simply by taking a point and working out how to join the dots. And so all of the buildings thought of in that way, and the instructions didn't need to be drawn. They had to be drawn for legal reasons, but actually they didn't need to be drawn to be built. The key thing, here's the girls' dormitory. There is a huge issue in Kenya and in other parts of the African continent of teenage girls not staying in school after the age of 14. And one of the reasons that they don't stay in school is that they've reached puberty and their status in society has changed, and they have a value. Girls. Boys can be hunters, can do all sorts of things. Girls get married, have children, forcibly or not. But girls stop going to school, typically when they have their first period. What girls needed in this situation was a compound that was protected and safe, in which they would feel safe from predators, men and boys, in the same school. And so we built a round compound with holes in it, holes which are filled with glass blocks that you can't see through, and gates into a garden, and around the garden, dormitories, and in the middle of the garden, a house for the mother, and the mother, the matron of the dormitory. And that was a very simple thing, of making a building which can house 100 girls, 200 girls, and be safe. It would allow a group of teenage girls to stay in school, live at the school, feel safe, and be cared for in order to get through high school, to get to the point where 1 or 2 of them may even go to college or apply for college. That was the goal. The water was the way in, to think about it, but the real goal was to encourage girls to stay in school. I had a daughter. I believe in girl power, and I went to see, we won a prize, after the first school being called the Greatest School on Earth, we won an award through the Buckminster Fuller Challenge in America, international challenge, in the name of Buckminster Fuller. And one of the things that I did as a result of that was I went to meet famous eco-activists. Not one of them was called Paul Hawken, who wrote a book called The Natural Capital. He was somebody who was thinking about sustainability in a very deep way. And he said, David, what is the single most important thing in relation to the potential survival of our species? Is it low energy fluorescent light bulbs, wind turbines, photovoltaics? And he had put together an encyclopedia of techniques for addressing sustainable design issues, and he said the #1 issue is educating girls. So that was the whole point of this, was that not to do with drinking water, to do with providing the circumstances whereby girls could be educated. This is the house of the matron, which we ended up paying for ourselves because we ran out of money on the project. It cost £5,000, little house, but it was really important. The dining room with its rainy season coat comes off in the dry season, and the irrigation pipework being laid for the agriculture, which provides food for the school and the community, and also this spire, which was made out of surplus material. Now, there's one little detail which is meaningless, probably, but in the first school we used wood, because we thought wood would be cheaper and more locally available. And actually, the quality of the wood was so poor, and the wood was so wet that when it dried out, it twisted and cracked, and that caused us problems. So what we used in the secondary school, second time round, was very small section angles, but in the smallest section that was readily available, which was the cheapest, and then put them together in different ways. But there wasn't enough left over to make a frame for a bell, because this building is used as a chapel at the weekends for the entire community. And my favourite project, which is a toilet. These must look so, they're very crude, very simple buildings, built very inexpensively. This was $8,000 for 20 toilets, which is, and there's, they have some funny things to do with the section. The arrangement, every group of toilets is arranged around a clothes drying courtyard to dry clothes. And for the girls, that's important. They have the courtyard of their dormitory, but also the idea was that girls who don't have very many clothes also get embarrassed when they are washing their clothes and hanging them up. And we wanted to make a discreet way of having clothes drying areas which were not visible generally. And so the clothes drying courtyards in between, and also each of these has a vent which is from the pit here, which receives the waste material, which is then dried out by air moving through. There's a black painted panel with the sights on the equator. It gets hot, draws the air through high speed, and that helps dry out waste material, which can then be dug out and used as burnt, and then used as a compost. Not used raw as a compost because it's still got full of contaminants, but burnt off and then used where it's a nutrient-rich filler for topsoil. This is the big tank underneath the sports stadium. In some details inside, this one we built in steel because it was going to have lots of people on it, but we still built it for the equivalent of $150 a square metre. The back of it, every surface organised to catch the rain with big surface water drains. The other side and inside classrooms. These are the girls from the surrounding villages. And this is my friend Diana Sierra, who makes reusable sanitary towels. And she is a designer. And she's doing a workshop with girls who, some of whom will go into live in the dormitory, on menstrual hygiene, which is a really important part of our project because that means that the girls are educated about how their body will change as they go past through puberty and not feel embarrassed and not feel unsupported and be encouraged to stay in school. And by doing workshops of that kind and giving girls the resources that they need in order to feel secure in themselves, they're also encouraged to stay in school. But what was so moving was that, I mean, this group, they've got nice looking clothes on, but these are their best, Sunday best clothes. And there are no men in this picture. And there are no men in this picture because we were there, not in the room. We were told to leave. Of course, because the most intimate things were being discussed, and the girls would not feel safe discussing them if there were men around. But what they're holding in their hands, these girls, is they're holding a piece of paper, and on that piece of paper, every single girl wrote what they wanted to do in their life. These are children who come from communities where people might live on as little as $1 a day. And what was written on those pieces of paper was astonishing. I want to be a teacher. I took photographs of every girl with holding up what she wanted to be. And she's in this school. I want to be a teacher. I want to be an engineer. I want to be a doctor. I want to be a nurse. Some even wanted to be architects. But people wanted to be significant members of not just their own community, but to contribute to the world. And it was so moving that what the result of building the building and making the space and holding the workshops and making available a different quality of life was that those aspirations could be voiced. Now, whether they can be met is another matter, and whether architecture has anything to do with that is still a question, but it was a very, very important thing to do. Now, I started with soup, stone. I want to end with another story, which again I told in a different context last year. This is a golden egg. It doesn't look like a golden egg, I know, because it's a grayscale image. It looks like it's silver. It's gold, you have to imagine, I'm sorry. It's a golden egg. And there is a story which is as ubiquitous as the soup stone story, the story of the stone soup, which is the story of the golden egg. And I did this last year. I hope you'll forgive me for doing it again, those who were here. Do you mind? So I'm nearly finished, so you can all go home. And I'd like to tell you a story. And the story is the story of the golden egg, which is a cautionary tale. Golden egg. Happy? Smiling? This was I wrote this for a conference called The Future of Design. The story of the golden egg, like the story of the stone soup, has been told and retold countless times in countless places, written in almost every language of the world. The story about a poor farmer and his family relates discovery to a dream. Formerly unimaginable, the discovery brings hope and the belief that a long and prosperous future has become a reality. The story goes something like this. As a strange consequence of divine bioengineering or genetic modification, a goose, a chicken, occasionally a duck, is discovered that can lay a golden egg, an exceptional feat that is accomplished daily, bringing a singular, valuable object into the family's life, once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, until the transformative power of this extraordinary invention is taken for granted. That's the point. In a tragic turn that is more than a momentary lapse of faith, the family find that enough is not enough. However much better life has become, however much more of everything there is than before, more is needed. More, and more. A conspiracy is hatched, the consequence of greed, that most basic human impulse, the result, as I believe you know, is so ghastly that it is better left unspoken. The arc of this tale. Opportunity knocked, was enjoyed, then exploited, life improved, surpassed expectations, and then precipitously declined. To end with an ending that should have been a beginning. Because the problem is that a gift is never a gift. And so there's the complexity. There was one of the complexities. Rather like me with my terrible way of falling in love with Istanbul, which is not so terrible really. I also work in a situation where I am an embodiment of a previous generation's colonial authority. And I'm a man. And I'm bringing a gift, which isn't a gift, because there's an economy involved in all gift giving, which is inevitably complex. And so, all I can say is that it's worth trying. And the most extraordinary moment is when the buildings were finished and a sports tournament took place, and this stadium with 8 classrooms, including one environmental training room, and offices for a local sports league committed to environmental education, and a great event took place where literally thousands of people came to see the buildings, and even to do the Mexican wave, which having designed the steelwork, was a bit frightening. Actually, I didn't do the design of the steelwork or the calculations, but it was still frightening because, unfortunately, because of the geometry and because of the way the building was braced, even in this situation, it was safe. It leaked a bit, we had to fix it. But a building that's designed to catch the water sometimes catches a little bit too much in the wrong places. But then those things can be dealt with, and those things are things we deal with all the time as architects anyway. The issue here was to work in a completely different way, with a different purpose, which was to find a way of making that object which works like a soup stone that brings the community together and that facilitates many things which might not otherwise be possible, or at least might not have been dreamt of. And that was the moment. Now, I was going to finish there, and I should, but there was one person in the room who wanted to know other things about you, so I'm going to show you three slides. Is that right? Yes? So, as part of the project, all sorts of other activities went on in order to raise awareness. This is me in Venice at the Biennale, where the project was exhibited as part of the US Pavilion's exhibit in 2014. And at that time, this is Mabel Wilson, who's an African-American architect, and we made big posters, and we took them to Venice, and we made famous architects carry them. We photographed them, and then we used social media to disseminate images of people. And each of these is a photograph of a student at the school, and then an encouragement to learn about water banks and learn why girls' education is important in relation to the water issue, empower girls. And so we went all the way around Venice to do this as a performance, and then exhibited the posters and online and in galleries in different places around the world over the last few years, and that campaign continues. This is Gediminas Urbanos, who is from MIT, Art, Culture and Technology program. So these are all people who are educators and artists and architects, but we encourage them to, even if only for a minute, collaborate in the project in order to make ourselves accountable in the context in which we work, not just and work and teach and the things that we do day to day. And this photograph is from a site I'm working on at this moment, which is in Ghana, outside Kumasi, in a village called Captivated, which, as you can see, has terrible soil erosion issues, low sanitation, very poor water quality, if not any at all, and a very polyglot community of people who were displaced and went into the mountains to forage and also ultimately to farm cocoa. And this little girl is called Lee. And I wrote about her a year ago, because it seems to me that, and I actually, in a very deliberate, naive and sentimental way, if you remember I started with that note about the fact that I was reading Autumn Hammock's book about the naive and the sentimental author and novelist. And I am a naive and sentimental architect. I think in the way he's talking about writing, I think it's important. For me, it was very helpful in relation to thinking about architectural practice. And so I hope you will forgive me for the absolutely relentless use of sentimentality and romance in order to try to make a few little points about architecture. And hope is the person that we're doing a project for in Ghana. And hope is the purpose as well as the person. And that's where I'd like to finish.